In March of 1978, deep in the mountains of Northern California, searchers stepped into a silent forest buried beneath heavy snow. For months, investigators had been looking for 5 missing men, friends, teammates. All of them had vanished after attending a basketball game. At first, the case looked like a tragic accident. Perhaps they had taken a wrong turn. Perhaps they had become stranded somewhere in the wilderness. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Because months after the men disappeared, search teams discovered something hidden deep in the forest. A small Forest Service trailer. Inside that trailer was the body of one of the missing men. He lay in a bed, wrapped in blankets, but the scene surrounding him was deeply unsettling. Inside the trailer were shelves of food, military ration packs, boxes of supplies. Enough food to keep a person alive for months. Nearby were blankets, matches, even propane heating tanks that could have warmed the shelter. Everything needed to survive was within reach. Yet the man lying in that bed had slowly starved to death. Investigators soon realized something even more disturbing. Evidence suggested he had not died quickly. He had survived there for weeks, possibly for months, and somehow during that time, the food around him had barely been touched. He had been alive, but he had not used the supplies that could have saved him. And he had not been alone in the mountains, because months earlier, 5 friends had vanished together after leaving a basketball game. Only 4 would ever be found. And the mystery of what happened to them in the Sierra Nevada mountains still remains unsolved. The story began on February 24th. 1978, in the quiet town of Chico, California. That evening, 5 friends climbed into a car and drove to watch a college basketball game at California State University. For them, basketball was more than just entertainment. It was part of their routine, part of their friendship, and in many ways, part of their identity. The group consisted of Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Gary Mathias, and Ted Wire. Most of the men lived with mild intellectual disabilities, but they worked jobs, lived with family members, and maintained fairly structured daily routines. Their families often described them as dependable and predictable. Jack Madruga, who owned the car, was known as the most responsible member of the group. He worked at a snack bar and was extremely protective of his vehicle. Family members later said he rarely allowed anyone else to drive it. He also kept the car meticulously clean. Bill Sterling was quieter and more reserved. He lived with his parents and worked at a local restaurant. He loved routine and became anxious when plans changed unexpectedly. Jack Hewitt was known for being gentle and friendly. He enjoyed spending time with the group and rarely went anywhere without them. Ted Wire, who would later be found in the trailer, was especially passionate about basketball. Friends described him as enthusiastic and energetic whenever sports were involved. And then there was Gary Mathias. Gary was slightly different from the others. He had served in the U.S. Army and had experience with military survival training. However, Gary also struggled with schizophrenia and had previously spent time in psychiatric treatment. Despite this, he had formed a close bond with the other men. Together, the 5 friends had built their lives around a shared activity. They played on a local basketball team designed for individuals with developmental disabilities. And the next day, February 25th, they were scheduled to play in a tournament. For weeks, they had been talking about it. They had practiced. They had prepared their uniforms. Family members later recalled how excited they seemed that evening. The tournament mattered to them. They planned to leave early the next morning, which made what happened that night even more confusing, because nothing about their plans involved driving into the mountains. After the college game ended that evening, the group began the drive home. Around 10 o'clock, they stopped at a small convenience store in Chico. A store clerk later confirmed seeing them there. They purchased candy bars, soda, milk, and snacks. The interaction seemed completely ordinary. The men were calm, friendly. Nothing about their behavior suggested distress. After leaving the store, they returned to Madruga's car and began the trip home. Under normal circumstances, the route should have been simple. From Chico, they would drive south toward the towns of Yuba City and Marysville. The distance was less than an hour, but instead of heading south, investigators later discovered that the car had traveled east, into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. At first, the road wound through rural farmland, but eventually it climbed higher into forested terrain. The farther east you drove, the more remote the landscape became. Small roads twisted through mountains and deep valleys. During winter, many of those roads became extremely dangerous, especially at night, and especially during snowstorms. On the night of February 24th, weather conditions were already deteriorating. Cold winds swept through the mountains. Snow had begun falling across higher elevations. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Driving conditions would have been difficult even for experienced drivers, which raises a troubling question. Why would the group continue driving deeper into the mountains? Even more puzzling, the road where their car was eventually found was not on any logical route home. To reach it, they had traveled nearly 70 miles in the wrong direction. It was a road that locals rarely used during winter, and it led only farther into isolated wilderness. 3 days later, a forest ranger spotted a car along that road. It sat alone in the snow. When investigators arrived, they confirmed it was Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego, but the condition of the car made the mystery even deeper. The vehicle was not stuck. It still had fuel. The battery worked. The engine showed no mechanical problems. In fact, the car appeared fully capable of driving away. Yet it had been abandoned. The doors were unlocked. The keys were missing, and the 5 men who had been inside were gone. Investigators noticed footprints leading away from the vehicle, but heavy snow had erased most of the tracks. Whatever had happened after they left the car was nearly impossible to reconstruct. But another detail soon complicated the investigation. A strange witness had come forward. That witness was a man named Joseph Shones. On the same night the 5 men disappeared, Shones had been driving along a nearby mountain road. During the drive, he experienced a sudden heart attack. In severe pain, he pulled his car to the side of the road and climbed out. He lay down beside the vehicle, hoping the pain would pass. While lying there in the darkness, he claimed he saw headlights approaching in the distance. According to Shones, a vehicle stopped somewhere along the road. Then he saw several figures moving nearby. He believed he saw a group of men, possibly 5 or 6 people. At one point, he even reported seeing a woman carrying a baby. Shones said he shouted for help, but no one responded. Instead, the figures continued moving through the darkness. Eventually, the lights disappeared, and the people vanished into the forest. Shones later managed to drive himself to safety. When investigators interviewed him, his story raised several questions. The number of people he reported seeing did not perfectly match the missing group, and none of the missing men were known to be traveling with a woman or child. Additionally, Shones had suffered a heart attack during the event, which raised the possibility that confusion or hallucination could have affected his perception. Still, some investigators believe his sighting may contain an important clue, because if the men were alive in the mountains that night, they may have been walking along that same road. But if they were walking there, why didn't they respond to someone calling for help? Weeks passed without answers. Search teams combed the mountains. Helicopters scanned the forest. Rescue dogs followed scent trails through snow-covered terrain. But winter conditions made the search incredibly difficult. Deep snow covered the ground. Many roads were blocked. Temperatures dropped dangerously low at night. Eventually, the official search was suspended. Months passed. Then, in June of 1978, a group of motorcyclists exploring the forest stumbled across a remote Forest Service trailer. It sat deep in the mountains, nearly 20 miles from where the abandoned car had been found. When the riders opened the door, they immediately sensed something was wrong. Inside the trailer, lying in a bed, was Ted Wire. But what investigators discovered inside that shelter would become one of the most disturbing elements of the entire case. Ted had lost an extraordinary amount of weight, nearly 100 pounds. His beard had grown long. His hair was untrimmed. Medical examiners later concluded that he had not died immediately after entering the trailer. Instead, he had survived for an extended period of time. Forensic analysis suggested he may have lived there for as long as 8 to 13 weeks. Inside the trailer were boxes of sea rations, military food supplies stored for emergency use. Investigators estimated there were enough rations to feed a person for nearly a year, yet almost none of them had been opened. Nearby were propane tanks designed to power a heating system, but the heating system had never been used. Blankets were stacked in the room. Matches were available. Everything required for survival was present. Yet Ted Wire had slowly starved. The most puzzling detail involved the bed itself. Ted had been carefully wrapped in sheets and blankets. This suggested that someone else had been present after his death. Someone had covered him, which means Ted likely did not spend those final weeks entirely alone. As investigators searched the surrounding forest, they discovered more remains. About 11 miles from the abandoned car, they located the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Both men had died from exposure to the freezing temperatures. Nearby, searchers discovered skeletal remains belonging to Jack Hewitt. But one member of the group was still missing, Gary Mathias. Gary's disappearance remains one of the most troubling aspects of the case, because unlike the others, Gary had survival training from his time in the military. He understood how to navigate wilderness terrain. Even more intriguing, investigators found a pair of shoes inside the trailer. The shoes belonged to Gary, which suggested that Ted Wire may have been wearing them during his final weeks. But Gary himself was gone. His body was never found. And despite decades of searching, no confirmed trace of him has ever been discovered. Over the years, investigators have proposed many theories. One possibility is that the men simply became lost. Perhaps they accidentally turned onto the mountain road and became trapped by snow. After abandoning the car, they may have attempted to walk toward safety. But that explanation still leaves many questions unanswered. Why drive 70 miles in the wrong direction in the first place? Why abandon a functioning car? Another theory suggests the group may have encountered someone along the road. Perhaps they became frightened. Perhaps they believed they were being chased. If panic set in, they may have fled into the mountains without thinking clearly. Some investigators also believe Gary Mathias may have played a key role in what happened next. It is possible that Gary helped Ted survive inside the trailer. Perhaps he left the shelter repeatedly to search for help or supplies, and perhaps something happened to him during one of those trips. But no physical evidence has ever confirmed that theory. The mountains themselves add another layer to the mystery. The Sierra Nevada wilderness is vast and unforgiving. Even experienced hikers sometimes disappear there without leaving a trace, which means it is entirely possible that Gary Mathias died somewhere deep in the forest. His remains simply never discovered. But even that explanation does not resolve the most haunting detail of the entire case. A trailer filled with food, a man who survived for weeks, and supplies that could have saved his life, yet were never used. More than 4 decades later, the mystery of the Yuba County Five still lingers. 5 friends left a basketball game together. They should have been home within an hour. Instead, they drove deep into the mountains. A car was abandoned in the snow. Bodies were later found scattered across the forest. One man survived for weeks inside a shelter filled with food, and another man vanished completely. Somewhere in the mountains of Northern California, the final explanation may still be hidden, waiting quietly beneath the trees and snow, a final clue to a mystery that has never truly been solved.